Welcome. How are y'all doing today? Let me try that again. How are y'all doing today? Did y'all ever go to those churches or those schools where they asked you, like, say amen, or how are you doing today? I didn't hear y'all. How are y'all doing today? So we're doing this prophetic preaching series, which I'm sure y'all hear in your classes, those of you that are studying here, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard throughout your life. And I had not heard the Reverend Dr. Willie Francois III, is that right? Until convocation. And if y'all were here for convocation, wow, was that a sermon? And it was just so powerful, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful that you had time to be with us today and to be able to, again, preach and speak to us and speak life to us. So without further ado, here is Reverend Dr. Francois.
Thank you so much, Dean, and to the leadership of our school, and of course, our students and my wonderful colleagues. It has been published, the title that I'm going to choose for this homily, but I'll be drawing this idea from 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1. It says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So may the gods do to me or more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life. Verse 11 says, And the voice said, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Now, there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting rocks and breaking mountains in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. There came a voice that said, What are you doing here, Elijah? Verse 1 captured my attention. It said, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed the prophets with the sword. And then the messenger said to him, May the gods do to me or more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. I want to talk about braving the backlash. This year, we've commemorated the 60th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which tooled the federal government to be a great purveyor and protector of the rights of black people and expanded access to public accommodations in an era churning from the human rights crisis of Jim and Jane Crow. I was at a meeting in the White House, and I recalled that as we are commemorating 60 years of the right to vote in this country, 60 years of America actually trying to be a multiracial democracy, 60 years that America is really sharing what it means to be a democracy, very little has changed since 1964. I know we have had a black president. We have a black woman on the Supreme Court. I know that there is a black woman who is running for president now who is also the vice president, but very little has changed since 1964. Since 1964, African American unemployment has run twice as high as white unemployment. Since 1964, the number of incarcerated people in the U.S. has gone from less than 200,000 to now more than 2.2 million. Since 1964, voting rights have been compromised, and now politicians elect their voters instead of voters electing their politicians. Since 1964, black college graduates still make less than white high school graduates. Since 1964, the number of police killings a year has surpassed the number of lynchings in its highest era. Although we say so much has changed, very little has changed since 1964. And one of the reasons I assume is because whenever there is racial progress, there seems to always be a racist backlash. Whenever we see progress in the direction of racial justice, there seems to be a backlash, a white backlash to that progress, to that justice, to those gains. Historians like Carol Anderson in her book White Rage helped to track out just how racial progress is met by racist backlash. After 246 years of chattel slavery, Reconstruction gave us the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We saw the election of black public servants. We witnessed the consequential formation of Morehouse College, Spelman College, Howard University, and Fisk University. However, there was a racist backlash to that racial progress. In that era, after Reconstruction, we saw the creation of the original American terrorists, the KKK. Lynching was the order of the day. Convict leasing system replaced the plantation, and the ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson allowed us to live in a country that legalized separate and unequal, because whenever there's racial progress, there's always a racial backlash. In the Civil Rights era, we saw Brown v. Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. However, whenever there is racial progress, there's always a racist backlash. In 1968, the very same year that we passed the Fair Housing Act, we elected Nixon on a law and order platform that paved the way for the Southern Strategy and for mass incarceration, because whenever there is racial progress, there's always a racist backlash. In 2008, we elected Barack Hussein Obama as the 44th president of the United States, but we also saw the rise of the Tea Party vowing to take the country back. Police brutality escalated, healthcare was jeopardized, voter suppression was legalized. We shut down the country every single year in order to build a wall, because whenever there is racial progress, there's always a racist backlash. To be clear, in my estimation, 2016 was not a loss for Hillary Clinton. It was really a racist backlash to racial progress when 63% of white men and 52% of white women voted for an unprepared, narcissist, bigoted cyber bully who exploited workers and evaded taxes. In 2020, record numbers of Americans trekked to the polls to defeat a white supremacist and give opportunity for reparations and anti-incarceration and gender equity and police accountability. But we also saw in that same year, in 2021, more than 440 bills were introduced in 49 states with an eye of restricting brown and black votes. In fact, in 2024, this racial backlash to racial progress is real when you have an insurrectionist in chief who is back on the ballot after staging a coup against his own government with charges and hundreds of millions of dollars owed to people he violated in their bodies and in business. Because whenever there is racial progress, there's always a racist backlash. But what I love about being God's people, the beautiful tapestry of what it means to be created in the image of God, is that we have ways of surviving the backlashes and achieving great progress. We are buoyed by a sturdy poise and unimpeachable dignity of our ancestors. We are strong enough to survive any threat, any target, any movement, any conspiracy. We have been fortified, unshakable, unbreakable, and unmovable because we represent the beautiful diversity of the image of God. And Elijah in our text is under a a broom tree. We find him hiding in the cave on the mountain because he has been shocked by a royal backlash to prophetic progress. Just one chapter prior to this, he demonstrates that Yahweh, the God of covenant, the God of liberation, the God of love, has demonstrated power over the gods of hate, the gods of bigotry, the gods of government, the gods of restriction and domination. But in spite of his victory, in spite of his prophetic progress, he is succumbing to the terror of a royal backlash. But he shows us that we as God's people have the capacity to brave, even survive governmental and racist and sexist backlashes to the progress that we've achieved because we are anchored in the unfolding love of God. Elijah shows us that if we are going to brave the backlash, that we need a calculated re-memory. I like that term, re-memory. I borrow it from that great thinker Toni Morrison, who helps us understand how memory actually works. I'll say it again. The Elijah we find in chapter 19 is the faintest echo of his former self. Though he defeated Baal and 450 Baalist prophets, 450 state co-opted chaplains, we find him nihilistically cowering in a cave. This withdrawal episode comes not long after he's ended a national drought, not long after he's demonstrated that God routs the gods of government. After the monumental victory over Baal and Baal's bought out prophets, it says that the queen threatens him, but threatens him in the name of the gods he's already defeated. What an interesting proposition. He is running from a force, running from ideas, running from realities that he's already defeated, because it is possible for us, even with all of our blessedness and all of our imagination and all of our creativity, to allow the disconnect between our souls and our roles to make us vulnerable to the backlashes that come our way. He is running, he is hiding, he's a fugitive of his greater self because he has heard a threat in the name of ideas, in the name of gods that he thought he already defeated. And that is what we must always remind ourselves with our calculated re-memory, that the things and the ideas and the realities that we are called to fight today are realities that have already been defeated by freedom-loving, conscious people of years past. The very victory that births the animosity of the government is the victory that should have fueled his feet to stand firm and remember that he has already beat the gods of government, the gods of whiteness, the gods of patriarchy, the gods of materialism, the gods of militarism, the god of segregation, the god of police brutality. We must remind ourselves that we have already had victories in our columns, and that ought to animate our temerity to fight. It's important to know that I understand the weight where Elijah is. Wouldn't we all feel a bit more turned in and torn apart if something we thought we defeated emerged again? But that's exactly where we are. The things, the problems, the ideas we thought we defeated in years past have a way of shape-shifting, have a way of resurrecting, have a way of remorphing themselves. Every time we think we've won, structural racism continues to surface. The gender wealth gap persists. Homophobia stiffens. School segregation reincarnates. Every time we think we've beat these bad ideas, they know how to resurface. That's why I think it's important for us to say that people are not our problem, but evil ideas that inform structures and use people to do its biddings, those are our problems. These old expired ideas threaten our humanity by snatching the thorough memories of our collectivized strength. We need to be reminded that evil ideas never take a day off. Evil ideas don't seem to know how to quit, but we have a history of overcoming evil ideas. The idea of black criminality is evil. The idea of women's inferiority is evil. evil. The idea that a person can be illegal is evil. The idea that love is not love is evil. The idea that bombs solve problems best is evil. Resurgent crises rob us of the capacity to relive our history of victories because we are stung still by hypothetical failure. And this is one of those moments in U.S. history that we must remember ourselves forward, that we must remind ourselves that there are things we know about ourselves and things we know about God. How Toni Morrison talks about rememory is retrieving those repressed memories, those things you forgot you knew. And sometimes we forgot that we know how to beat MAGA-ish factions. We know how to beat politicians who want to tell women what to do with their bodies. We know what to do with a criminal justice system that makes black and brown folk criminal while allowing criminal folk on Wall Street to hoard the money that bankrupt Main Street. We know what it means to fight and win if we can only lean into our rememory. This is why Gustavo Gutierrez, who now lives in sainted memory, he reminds us that history is not just remembrance. History is what thrusts us forward. We must move forward with the memory that we were born to rebel, that there is a holy rebellion in us. There is a creative revolution in us. I wish there were some rebels that came to chapel today who can think with Albert Camus. I rebel, therefore I exist. Every day is an occasion to remember that we were born to rebel. Moses rebelled against Egypt and gave us an exodus. Caleb rebelled against the cowardly and poured steel in the spine of the formerly enslaved. Deborah rebelled against Sisera and liberated Israel because we were born to rebel. Daniel rebelled against Darius and contended with imperialism. The 3 Hebrew men rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar and survived execution by furnace. We were born to rebel. John the Baptist rebelled against the religious establishment and paved the way for Jesus. Mary Magdalene rebelled against the demonic and reimagined discipleship because we were born to rebel. Muhammad rebelled against the old order of Mecca and protected the unprotected. The Buddha rebelled against attachment and modeled enlightenment because we were born to rebel. Harriet Tubman rebelled against slavery and conducted an underground railroad. Ida B. Wells Barnett rebelled against lynching and launched the first Say Their Name movement because we were born to rebel. Fannie Lou Hamer rebelled against the Democratic establishment and paved the way for us to open up the ballot box. Stacey Abrams rebelled against neo-Jim Crow voter suppression and sent a Union alum to the Senate from Georgia because we were born to rebel. We need a calculated rememory, but we also need consistent reframing. Sometimes we must re-see how we even got this far. It is important for us to put our journey in focus, to reframe the scope of our experience because he is in the wilderness. He is in a moment where he wants to give up on life. He's at a moment where he no longer sees value in his position as a prophet. He tells God that he wants to die, and then God gives him 2 meals. He eats those 2 meals, and then he walks for 40 days through the wilderness to the mountain, what the text calls the mountain of God. What we know in Deuteronomistic history is really, although it's called Horeb, it is Mount Sinai. Elijah arrives at a familiar place, a place where God is expected to show up. Elijah makes it to the mountain of God through inclement conditions of scarcity in the wilderness under unusual circumstances. And I ask myself, how did he even make it through the wilderness to the mountain with only 2 legs and 2 meals? 40 days trekking through the wilderness on 2 meals and 2 legs. And I don't know how it happened, but I just believe that there is something embedded in all of us that gives us the capacity to survive the unexpected and the unexplainable. It is a wonder that he made it to the mountain in the first place. And sometimes in order for us to brave the backlashes we are experiencing today, today, we have to remind ourselves that we probably shouldn't have made it this far with what we did not have and what the opposition did have. But we are the people who know how to live on the holy ordinary, everyday experiences that defy expectations and explanations. Here he is working through the wilderness, walking through the wilderness on 2 legs and 2 meals for 40 days. And this is important for all of us because some people in chapel should be honest that you don't really know how you made it this far. You don't really know how you've had enough strength to get here, how you've had enough imagination to get here, when all of the odds were stacked against you because of race, because of gender, because of another identity indicator. There's no reason why you should be here today, why you should have made it to chapel today. But that is the heritage of being a part of God's family, is that we know how to make it on the unexpected and the unexplainable. We have made it despite the terror visited upon Native Americans through genocide. We've survived 246 years of chattel slavery, 8 decades of Jim and Jane Crow, 40 years of a war on drugs and a war on poor people, a 1994 crime bill that criminalized black lives and brown lives. We have made it through 10 years of Make America White Again. There is no reason how we can fully explain why we are here, but this is why the poet Lucille Clifton says, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and it failed. Every day is a reason to celebrate because every day something was poised to snatch our dreams and snatch our creativity and snatch our courage and snatch our joy. But what should have destroyed us yesterday has failed. And as we look at where we are today, as difficult as it may be, we ought to be able to celebrate that we are people who make it on the unaccepted and the unexplainable. There are people who made it to Union with a frugal financial aid package, but God keeps us on the unexpected and the unexplainable. There are people who have questions in your family background that would disallow you to be in a privileged room like this, but we make it on the unexpected and the unexplainable. There are people who are thriving here who only had GEDs before they went to college, but God gives us strength to make it on the unexpected and the unexplainable. There are people who are raising families and building communities on a 9-to-5 that cannot support our lifestyles, let alone our charity, but God gives us the strength to make it on the unexpected and the unexplainable. Some of us have resumes that don't match where we are headed, but we have the gift of surviving on the unexpected and the unexplainable. We have to reframe how we got here in the first place. I'm done, but I'm grateful that we can brave the backlash because we have a calculated rememory. We consistently reframe our journey, but also every now and then we need places like chapel so we can have a courageous recalibration, that we have an experience with life, an experience with the aliveness of life, the creative genius of life. We have an experience with the holy, an experience with the sacred in all of the sacred's names that give us the capacity to go back and face a world that is backlashing against us. Did you hear the text that I read? It said he is on the mountain and the voice tells him, come out of the cave. And it says that the wind started blowing, but God was not in the wind. It says the fire starts raging, but God was not in the fire. The earth starts shaking, but God was not in the earthquake. And then it says a sound of sheer silence is what brings him out of the cave. For years, I know in my Sunday school imagination, we were told that it was a still small voice, and we make the assumption that God was in the silence. Maybe God is in the silence. In fact, God is in all moments, in all dynamics. I'm not really sure of what's actually happening here, but when I looked at the translation again, and I had a conversation with Will Gaffney, it does not say in the Hebrew, does not have to say in the Hebrew that he says, come out of the cave because God is about to pass by. But literally it can mean come out of the cave because God is passing by. And as God passes by, the earth starts shaking. As God passes by, the fire starts raging. As God passes by, the wind starts blowing. As God passes by, the prophet is in hiding. Maybe the prophet doesn't come out until he hears the silence because he's afraid of the shaking and afraid of the fire and afraid of the windstorm. But I am grateful that when we decide to come out of our caves, we can experience God as the fire rages. We can experience God as the earth shakes. We can experience God as the winds blow. In fact, I want to have the kind of creative imagination that I don't wait for the stillness and the calmness of life to find God and pursue God and embody God. I live with such creative commitment to God that I will find God in the floods. I will find God in the fire. I will find God in the shaking. Anybody ever had some shaking and some fire and some winds in your life? I promise you, even though God does not create them, God can be found within them. I want us to live the kind of open life, not a God-proof life, but an abundantly open life that allows us to experience God in the fire, experience God in the shaking, experience God in the storms. In fact, Frederick Douglass tells us, for it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not a gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm. We need the whirlwind. We need the earthquake. Sometimes we have to be the fire that warms chilly hearts. We have to be the earthquake that shakes up systems that shake down the poor. We have to be the storms that wash away the things that are cramping the lives of people who just want to breathe free. I'm grateful that when you go back to class after you've had a creative encounter with God, you can be the fire, you can be the earthquake, you can be the wind, because there is a world waiting for our courage, a world waiting for our faith, a world waiting for our imagination if we dare to come out of the caves and experience God as we are, where we are, when we are, because we have the power to brave backlashes.
Ooh. I wish we were in those churches where this wouldn't have stopped yet. Does anybody have any comments, questions, hallelujahs, amens inside you that you would like to shout out or say or ask? Yeah, amen, hallelujah. I know, David, you came specifically today. You said, it's going to be Willie, isn't it? Do you have a comment or question?
I just think this is what makes being at Union special, and I feel lucky to have heard today's sermon and look forward to participating in these types of chapel services more. And we have an event tonight, the encore event. If anyone would like to or can join us, or actually, sorry, wrong event. Wrong event. I am on the wrong event. Dr. Francois will be on a panel tonight